The train that arrived tomorrow, midnight in a city is a trick mirror. Everything is still there, the buildings, the roads, the people in their rooms. But it tilts the angles, smears the reflections, stretches a second until it's a rubber band you could snap with your thoughts. Tonight the streets glowed in a watercolor wash, sodium lamps pooling on wet asphalt, the sky an inky lid with no stars, only the red blink of a tower far away, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to you. Jace Hurley tucked his chin against the wind and followed the stairwell down into the transit belly of the city. The clock mounted above the turnstiles said 12:02 a.m., its second hand jerking like it resented the job. He swiped through, shoes tapping on old tile, and the smell rose to meet him, metal scraped thin, old paper, a faint copper tang of rainwater it had swallowed from 100 storms. He hadn't planned to work this late. He hadn't planned for the day to smudge like pencil under a clumsy hand either, but that was how overtime drew itself. Promise a tight line, deliver a smudge. The office emptied, the lights hummed, and he stayed. Then the bus sailed past his stop as if he were a ghost. By the time he reached Meridian Station, the last scheduled train was due any minute. He reached the platform and let the echo of his steps fall away. A few other night creatures waited, an older woman with a clutch of grocery bags cradled like children, a man in a suit who held his phone out at arm's length and squinted as though words might jump into focus if he glared at them, a young couple looking in two different directions, sharing a silence that sounded like static. The rails splayed into the dark mouth of the tunnel. A draft breathed out, damp and cool, and somewhere deeper a sound began, a low vibration that picked up the steel and set it humming. Jace rubbed his eyes. The day had sanded them down. He checked his own phone. The lock screen said Monday, 12:06 a.m., with the date stamped white and bland beneath it, still comforting in its ordinariness. He didn't need comforting, not really. He needed his bed. He needed the clean square of tomorrow like a fresh sheet of paper. The lights along the tunnel's lip pulsed. A headlamp appeared, round and yellow, hurtling closer, its wake dragging the platform air toward it. The train slid out of the dark, like something waking up. Brushed steel sides reflected the platform's stranded faces, so their eyes looked briefly like portholes in someone else's life. The doors aligned and exhaled open with a sigh. Jace stepped on. The car was almost empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed above blue vinyl seats that had seen everything and never once bothered to comment. He chose a seat halfway down, set his bag on his lap, and let the hum of the rails soak into him like a sedative. He didn't see the sign above the door at first, the digital one that scrolled the line and the destination and the time. He didn't see it because for a breath his eyes closed, and the car rocked him gently as if it approved of sleep. A jolt tugged him back. He looked up. The sign said, Meridian Line, inbound, Tuesday 12:07 a.m. He read it, blinked, and read it again. The word Tuesday walked across his brain like a spider. He raised his phone, woke it with a thumbprint that always made him feel like a safe yielding to a thief, and checked the date. It said Tuesday, not Monday. Not the second after midnight that lives on the border and wobbles like a drunk. Tuesday. The calendar tile had rolled over. The world had voted. He sucked in a breath that tasted suddenly of static. Across from him, a man who hadn't been there a second ago sat with a folded newspaper on his knees. He was thin in that expensive way. Thin like an idea drawn with a single pencil line. His suit fitted him as if it had been poured on, and his hair lay obediently in a shape scissors were proud of. He lifted the newspaper without moving his eyes, and made a sound that was not quite a hum and not quite speech. Jace's heart gave an irritated knock in his chest. He told it to calm down. You fell asleep for a second, that's all. Your body filed the paperwork and stamped it without telling you. That happens. But it was a flimsy explanation, and he felt the flimsiness like you feel cheap cloth against your skin. The doors slid shut. The train moved. The sound through the couplers ran down the car like a zipper. The station was sucked backward into the tunnel. The tile and advertisements and a poster about flu shots streaked into a gray ribbon and then disappeared. He stared at the digital sign. It continued to scroll with the patient arrogance of machines that know they can outlast you. Next stop, Larch, Tuesday 12:08 a.m. His throat tightened. He wasn't prone to panic. The world put on strange hats sometimes. You didn't have to clap for them. But something about the way the car felt. The temperature dropping by degrees you couldn't measure. The lights with their faint, imperceptible flicker like eyelids deciding whether to blink, made panic a reasonable guess. He cleared his throat. Hey, he said, the word coming out small and private, like something you would not admit to having said later. The man across from him didn't move. He turned his head a fraction, as if acknowledging that yes, there were other creatures in this aquarium, then lowered his eyes to the paper. The headline at the top was in a font Jace recognized. The words were not. They looked like words. They had shapes that promised meaning, but when Jace tried to read them, his brain slipped right off. Not nonsense letters, not ciphers, but a kind of semantic oil he couldn't get purchase on. The photograph below the headline didn't help. It was a train. Its nose was unfamiliar, a sleek knife of a design he hadn't seen on any line in this city. The picture's caption was a chorus of letters that wouldn't hold still. The car's far door opened. An older woman stepped through from the next carriage, grocery bags hooked along each arm. Her coat was buttoned to her throat in mismatched buttons, and her eyes were a pale, winter morning blue. She glanced at Jace and offered him a look that could have been a question or an apology. For what, he did not know. Above the door, another sign, smaller, neglected-looking, glowed with tiny vacuum-lit numerals. In red dots, it said 12:09. The dots trembled a little as the train ran. He brought his phone up again. Notifications stacked themselves politely. A headline from a local alert service. Water main break on Tuesday morning slows commute. The timestamp was today, 5:52 a.m., which had not yet occurred. A message from a number he recognized as a co-worker, Kendrick, said, "Where are you? The client is early." The time attached to the bubble was 8:01 a.m., which belonged to a future that was supposedly happening. A calendar reminder had fired and pinned itself like a moth. Dentist, Tuesday, 2:30. He hadn't made that appointment yet. He was almost sure of it. The train whooshed into Larch Station, and the world on the platform looked like any world you could love if you needed to. Ad posters, and a lonely trash bin, and a bench with a slat missing, so that if you sat, your spine would discover it and complain. The station clock said 12:10 a.m., under the name Larch, in tiled letters from a century when spelling your town felt like a blessing. The doors opened and breathed without warmth. No one got on. No one got off. Jay stood anyway. He stepped onto the platform. The air felt thinner, not cold, not warm, like the air high on a ladder where your breath has just a little farther to travel. He looked up at the tiled station name and then up again at the street-level stairs, where a rectangle of darkness promised whatever it always promised. Street, drizzle, a vacant taxi promising more promises. He started toward the stairs and stopped. His ticket was in his jacket pocket. A single-use paper slip because his tap card had drained out without telling him. He'd fed the kiosk bills and watched the paper come out like a tongue. He pulled it now. The printing on it hadn't existed when he bought it. Under the line name and fare was a row of black text blocks. Valid date, Tuesday. The letters shone with fresh ink sheen, as though they were proud of themselves. He ran his thumb over them. They didn't smudge. The train's doors dinged once in a language of warning he understood only as a sensation. Jace looked at them and at the stairs. Footsteps on the far platform reached him. 2 commuters, their voices curved by sleep, crossing to a different car, not paying attention to a man holding a ticket that had lied politely. He returned to the car as if some elastic tether reeled him in. The door closed behind him. The conductor's voice, far away and intimate at once, slid along the ceiling speakers. Meridian line inbound. Next stop, Iron Vale. Tuesday, 12:13. The voice had the quality most transit voices have, a tone that belonged to no person, only to the system. And yet there was, if you listened, another voice braided with it. Human, older. The slightest lift on the 3rd syllable of Iron Vale. A smile faked for a photograph you didn't want taken. Jace tried speaking to the man again. "Do you see that?" he asked, indicating the sign, his phone, the whole proposition of the night. The man lifted his eyes. They were glass gray, polished smooth by a long river. He set one gloved finger on the edge of his newspaper. "Schedules are fictions," he said in a low voice that barely disturbed the air. "We agree, and then we forget that we agreed." He looked down again. The paper in his hands did a small rustle, like leaves complaining to each other about wind. The woman with the grocery bags sat at the far end, set the bags down like she was putting children to bed on a long trip, and folded one hand over the other in her lap. Her gaze tracked the windows, the glass showing only the flicker of the tunnel walls, as if the city had decided that its insides were none of your business. Jace's scalp prickled. The train accelerated into a stretch of tunnel where the track noise changed key. The car rocked left and right with a motion that suggested the world outside was not certain where the rails had decided to be. The fluorescent lights flickered, a heartbeat, then 2, and then settled. He leaned back and tried to frame his thinking. He'd slept, that was all. Even a minute could turn the page. He'd closed his eyes at 12:06, opened them at 12:08, and lost a day to a trick of measurement. He wanted to believe it. Iron Vale was a station dressed like a tired banker, neat, slightly scuffed, a little dignity clinging to its features. The clock said 12:14. Posters told commuters where to get help if they couldn't ask the right kind of question. The train paused as if listening. Doors opened to a platform that had nothing new to teach. A man in a sweater vest stood facing the tiled wall and didn't move. When the doors shut, Jace watched him through the glass as the train slid forward, and the man remained, still facing the wall, like someone putting time out on himself. He began to notice other things. At first he heard it in the pauses between the wheels' anthem and the hum of the overhead lights. A whisper, faint as the idea of a whisper. Then it shaped itself into a pattern.
In the next car, a child's laugh rose and fell, not shrill, not mischievous, but shaped like the memory of a laugh. In this car, the sound of paper pages turning came at intervals that were too regular, too patient. The conductor's chime before each announcement came a fraction earlier every time, as if it were impatient on his behalf.
And the clocks, the one above the door and the one on his phone, never agreed. They were close, 1 minute out, then 2, then aligning as if in apology, then splitting again. When he looked at his reflection in the window glass, the window gave it back but with a disconcerting lag, as if the glass preferred to wait and see if he would keep his face. At Willow, a teenager boarded with headphones clamped on his skull like a promise he was keeping with himself. His eyes were half closed and distant. The music in his ears did not leak into the car. The wire from the headphones, the wire that shouldn't exist anymore in a world of tiny blue teeth, snaked down into his jacket pocket. Jace felt a shiver of relief at this ordinary sight. He fought the stupid impulse to ask what he was listening to. The teenager sat, and without looking up, held out a hand. Between thumb and forefinger lay a small paper rectangle, a ticket. Jace blinked at it. He hadn't seen conductors on this line in years, but the teenager didn't move until Jace, obeying a choreography he didn't remember learning, took the ticket from him. The boy's eyes stayed half closed. His other hand tapped a rhythm on his knee. 7 beats. Pause. 7 beats. The ticket between Jace's fingers was warm and soft in the way paper is when it's been kept close to the skin. Printed across it were 2 lines. Fare paid, 1 day, non-refundable. Purpose, diversion. He looked up. The teenager had already moved on to the next passenger, the suited man with the impossible paper. The man offered his own ticket. The teenager nodded as if hearing an answer no one else could hear, and when his fingers brushed the suited man's glove, Jace tasted metal in his mouth. The train's speed increased. The tunnel walls became a smear instead of a sequence. Somewhere, the tracks diverged. He didn't feel the switch, only the slight change in timbre as the metal sang a marginally different note. When the announcement came, the human voice threaded through the machine voice more clearly. Next stop, Bell Foundry. Tuesday, 12:26. Remember to mind the gap. The machine voice dumped the words like packages on a belt. The human voice allowed them to be sentences. It colored Bell Foundry with the memory of bells. Jace stood and moved toward the far door, the one that led to the next car. He didn't know why. He only knew that in his bones something had leaned forward as if drawn. The door's button glowed a hygienic green. He pressed it. The door split, then slid aside, and the hinge between this car and the next breathed cold air like the mouth of a well. The next car was identical in architecture and very different in temperature. It was cooler, though no air moved. 3 passengers sat at its midsection. A woman in a uniform that was and was not of this city's transit service. Navy with a stripe in a color he couldn't hold in his head, faced the aisle with her back very straight. Beside her, a man in work boots slept with a lunch pail jostling at his feet. Across the aisle, a figure that might have been female and might have been a coat draped over a skeleton, stared at its own hands as if they were a language it needed to relearn. On the near wall, a map of the meridian line spread its infection of colored dots. He had never seen it look like this. After Bell Foundry, the line forked into not 2 or 3 but a spray, so many lines that the glass looked like a spider web under a touch. The station names along the branches blurred when he tried to fix them, as if the ink refused to commit. He reached the end of this car and went on. Another car, then another. He didn't know what he was looking for until he found it. The door at the end of the 4th car bore a sign no one had bothered to make modern. It wasn't backlit. It wasn't slick. The letters had been painted on once with a brush that trembled under human skin. Conductor, it said, and beneath that, smaller. Authorized personnel only. He put his palm against the door and felt heat. Not warmth, but heat, as if the room beyond 8 hours like coal. He knocked. Habit. You knock on doors, even when you don't know what you'll do if someone answers. The door opened as if the knock unlocked it. The room beyond was tighter than he expected. A coffin with windows. A desk bolted to the floor held instruments and switches that did not belong to the present century, and some that did not belong to any. The world outside the narrow panes of glass was a tunnel, and in that tunnel, the idea of speed became a religion. On the wall, 6 clocks ticked at their own idea of a second. The space smelled like oil and old wool. A figure sat at the desk. He did not stand when Jace came in. He merely lifted his head. He was not young. He was not old. His hair was thick and gone to frost at the edges, his jaw stubborn as a doorframe. He wore a coat that might have been a uniform once, and then decided it preferred to be just a coat. On one lapel, a pin caught the fluorescent light and held it like a trapped moth. The pin was a small silver circle, crossed by a line like a horizon. "You're early," the man said. The words were neither annoyed nor pleased. They were notes on a ledger. "I got on at Meridian." Jace swallowed. Speaking made his mouth feel like a theater where his tongue, the actor, had forgotten its lines. "It says Tuesday." "It does," the man agreed. He tapped one of the clocks. Its second hand rotated steadily and had no interest in the other clock's opinions. "Sit, if it helps." There was a fold-down jump seat near the door. Jace sat because standing made his legs feel as if they were claiming credit they didn't deserve. "What is this?" he asked, and heard the smallness of the words. He cleared his throat and tried again. "What is this train?" The man turned one switch with 2 fingers. Somewhere far forward, the tone of the rails changed, and a wind moved through the sealed room. "Meridian line, inbound," he said, as if that settled it. When Jace didn't speak, the man glanced at him. His eyes were an unnameable color, the color of the space between lines on paper. "You could say it's a diversion," the man offered. He reached into a drawer and withdrew a stack of tickets, each stamped with the same 2 lines Jace had seen. The edges of the stack were darkened with the oils of long handling. "You could say it's a drain. A wick, maybe. This city runs hot. People pour their tomorrows into their pockets like small change and then complain when their coats get heavy." "I don't understand." Jace felt mild irritation in that place behind the eyes, where understanding usually installs its furniture. "I got on at midnight. It was Monday. Now it's Tuesday. You can't skip. Time doesn't." "Time doesn't," the man echoed, tasting the words. "You're half right, Mr. Hurley." Jace started. He hadn't offered his name. The man's expression didn't change. He spoke as if reading trivia he'd always known. "You work late. You oblige. That's a kind of prayer. You were going to miss a meeting tomorrow. That's a smaller prayer. Please let the future forgive what the present demands." "I wasn't," Jace began and stopped. He had ignored an email at 4:30 p.m. He had told himself he would draft the thing tonight and send it before bed. He had told himself the morning could absorb the difference without bruising. His mind's calendar had always been a pliable thing. You stretch days by not naming them. "The train helps," the conductor said. He made a small adjustment to a dial that didn't have numbers, only a banded gradient from charcoal to dawn. "We take the strain off certain threads. We move a handful of passengers one day ahead. The grid sighs, the knot eases. A big rig doesn't jackknife on I-14 at 8:16 a.m. A water main doesn't fracture when a jackhammer hits it. The city has fewer emergencies. Everyone arrives in time to fail at something smaller. Jace stared. You make it sound like you're, what? Balancing a ledger. I am, the conductor said. He smiled in a way that could have been approval or fatigue. We all are, including you. But someone has to push the buttons. The train throttled through a kink and steadied. The 6 clocks bickered with each other and refused to surrender. The conductor's pin winked again, a silver coin refusing to decide which side was heads. Jace felt a pressure building in his ears, the way it does when a plane descends. He swallowed, and it eased. Why me? Jace asked. The question that should have come first arrived late, out of breath, as if it had run to catch up. Why this car? Why this night? The conductor turned another switch. For a second, the glass of the window showed not tunnel wall, but a surface that shone like water in moonlight. The train swam through it. You were scheduled, he said. And Jace wanted to laugh because the word made everything sound reasonable. You would have driven tomorrow at 7:40. You would have glanced at your phone at 7:43 when it vibrated in your cup holder, with a calendar reminder you thought you'd already dismissed. At 7:44, a cyclist would have slipped his chain in the crosswalk at Ruskin and 3rd. At 7:44 and 14 seconds, you would have decided not to brake, because at that speed you could make it through, and you would have. The cyclist would have panicked and fallen in your lane. Your car would have been fine. He would not. Jace's throat went dry and then drier, a chalkboard left out in the sun. No, he said, because the word was the smallest shield available. No. The conductor spread his hands, palms up. It was not a gesture of surrender. It was a gesture of showing a trick's mechanism. We don't like to burden a thread with a knot too early. The city's fabric can take only so many new holes at once, so tonight we diverted you. You will not be there to make the choice at 7:44. Someone else will stop at the light because his son texted him a picture of the dog wearing his socks. The cyclist will not slip because he left 2 minutes earlier since he forgot his wallet and had to run back. There is an elastic in everything that holds its shape when you let it, Mr. Hurley. But someone has to know when to let go. Jace lifted his hands and then dropped them, because there was nothing for them to do with themselves. And you, take a day. The conductor nodded. The fare is 1 day. The city pays with time. Individuals pay with time. Everything does. You get it back by dying a day earlier, perhaps, or by having 1 day somewhere that feels shorter than it ought to. That is the kindest version. Sometimes it costs differently. He touched one of the clocks and then withdrew his finger as if it were too cold. Jace's mind ran its fingers over the idea and found the splinters. People don't consent. Do they consent to the grid collapsing? To water without pressure? To a chain of collisions because a single morning opened its jaws at the wrong moment? Consent is a calendar word, the conductor said. But there was no contempt in it. Only inventory. In any case, we ask when we can. He reached into the drawer again and removed something that wasn't a ticket. It was a small metal punch on a chain, the old kind you could use to puncture a ticket with a shape. The handle had been polished by decades of palms. The die plate gleamed with the tiniest notch, a circle with a line through it, the same horizon mark on the man's lapel pin. He held it out. You can refuse. Jace looked at the punch like it was a prop in a community theater production of a story he didn't remember auditioning for. How do I refuse? You punch your own ticket, the man said. You mark the fare as unpaid. You will get off at the next station, which will be Monday. You will go home. You will sleep. You will wake and be present for your scheduled day. You will have choices. His eyes softened just enough to be human. I am required to say, choices are expensive. And if I accept, the conductor's mouth moved as if tasting something he already knew well. Then you remain on the meridian. You will get off at your station, which will be Tuesday. You will be late for a meeting and earlier for another. The light at Ruskin and 3rd will not concern you because it has no use for you tomorrow. Sometime later, perhaps a year, perhaps longer, you will have a day that dissolves without your noticing. It will be the fare, quietly collected. It sounded so reasonable the way he said it. It sounded like paying a toll because the bridge is faster. Jace felt heat rise in his chest, then fall back like a wave that couldn't decide if shore was worth the trouble. What happens if I refuse and still choose to stop, he asked. And the word stop had too much weight. It knew what it was. The conductor reached, and for the first time Jace saw the tremor in his hand. Slight, disobedient. He moved one clock's minute hand backward with the nail. The hand resisted, then obeyed. When the knot is tight, you can pull a thread and the whole garment complains. The train exists so that someone who knows how can loosen the right loop without tearing the sleeve. If you refuse and stop, we will have to take that time from elsewhere. Someone else's lightly held moment will be harvested. A child will drop a dish and be punished for the shard. A retiree will miss a turn and not die. The ledger balances in ways you may not approve, Mr. Hurley. The only question is whether you want to be the one choosing the arithmetic. A hollow opened in Jace's chest that felt much older than he was. He thought of the teenager with the old-fashioned headphones. He thought of the suited man with the paper that wouldn't read. He thought of the woman with grocery bags heavy with tomorrow's apples. He thought of himself, the you that leaves the room before the you there is done talking. He thought of 7:44 at an intersection he sometimes rolled on a yellow, because night had a way of convincing him that rules didn't make sense at odd hours. He held out his hand. The conductor put the punch in it. It was heavier than it looked. The metal was cold enough to sting. The chain drifted against his knuckles with a sound that was half rattle, half whisper. He took his ticket from his pocket. The black text shone at him. Fare paid. 1 day. Non-refundable. Purpose. Diversion. He looked at the little circular die on the punch, at the horizon symbol. He knew precisely the pressure it would take to make it bite. There were people to whom a day meant a ledger of tasks and an inbox, and a handful of hours you sold for pieces of paper that bought you other pieces of paper. There were people to whom a day meant one more sunrise to count. He did not know which he was when you added up his receipts. He only knew that the idea of a man in boots asleep near a lunch pail, not being crushed by a chain of events, felt like a math problem with a single answer. He handed the punch back. The conductor nodded once, as if a meeting had concluded exactly on time and with no need for minutes. Bell Foundry in 2, he said. The coffee at the kiosk upstairs is bad today. Tomorrow, choose a different vice. Jay stood and the room tilted under him. It was the idea of a tilt. The floor's bolts kept their faith. He almost asked the conductor's name and then didn't. Names made it personal. Personal made it unfair. He moved back through the cars. The teenager with the headphones didn't look up as Jace passed. His thumb beat 7 times and paused. The suited man's paper said nothing and everything. The woman at the end of the car, smoothed her grocery bags with a gesture so tender it made Jace's throat sting. Bell Foundry arrived with a small squeal, as if the train were embarrassed to be seen. The doors opened. Jace stayed seated because the conductor hadn't been lying about Tuesday. They would spit him into it, whether he liked it or not. He kept his ticket between his fingers like a charm that had done its job and now wanted to be forgotten. Above the doors, the digital sign scrolled. Next stop, Graysill. Tuesday, 12:33 a.m. The color of the letters looked slightly greener for no reason he could name. He watched the stations pass. Time, like a restless animal, paced its enclosure. He watched the glass and his reflection's slight delay. And the delay lengthened for sharper angles. Turn your head too fast, and you become a trick. At Graysill, a woman in a pale coat boarded, a small suitcase rolling behind her like a well-behaved dog. Her coat was the exact color of the small bones in the back of your hand. She sat 2 seats down from Jace and did not look at him. Her hands were empty. She wore no ring. He did not notice at first that the teenager moved when she did. He did not notice because they did not look at each other, and because heavy things in a car make less sound than light things. But when the teenager paused beside her, his hand extended with a ticket. A sound like a penny dropped on a countertop pinged in Jace's ears. She took the ticket and held it, and for a second her mouth tightened as if she were about to say a true thing. Then the line of her mouth softened, and she put the ticket in her coat sleeve like a cigarette she would remember later not to smoke. The car's temperature slid by a degree the way a violin note slides when a tired finger searches for exactly the right place on the string and lands a hair above it. Jace shivered. The car lights didn't flicker. He still shivered. He got off at Caulfield because that was where he always got off. The signs, kind because they were old, told him where the exit was. The stairs were the same stairs. The air at the street was the same except for 2 degrees of difference, and a smell like bread he couldn't locate. He walked home through the city that had already used his day once without him, and he tried not to be offended that it didn't miss him. His apartment did not have the wrong number of chairs. His keys fit the lock. His bed had exactly the right gravity. He set his phone face down on the bedside table because the kindest thing he could do for it was not to ask it to prove that it knew what day it was. He dreamed of running along tracks that stretched not forward or back, but sidewise. Whole cities lined up in different sheets, like paper you could slip between if your fingers were thin enough. He dreamed of a child shapeless as an idea clapping 7 times and waiting. He dreamed of bells. When morning came, Tuesday morning, the one the city had already tried out and decided to keep, he moved through it as if it might break under him if he planted his weight carelessly. He missed the first bus and let it be. He did not take his car keys. He walked. At 7:44, he stood on the sidewalk at the corner of Ruskin and 3rd and waited to see whether the city would keep a promise he had not been allowed to make. He felt stupid, and then did not. A cyclist glided through the crosswalk with the absent grace of someone who has already lived this morning and has decided to forgive it. A man in a sedan stopped at the light and swiped his thumb at a picture his son had sent him of the dog wearing his socks. He laughed. The light changed. Everyone moved. No one died. When he sat at his desk later with the bland comfort of email scrolling under his fingers, the morning's quiet clung to him like steam after a shower. He answered Kendrick's message with running late. Traffic is wild, and the lie felt harmless in a way some lies do, when they are told in relief rather than malice. He reached more than once for his wallet to find the ticket, to see if the ink would fade if he looked hard enough. He stopped himself. He put the ticket in a kitchen drawer instead that evening, under a stack of takeout menus, and told himself he had put it there to throw away later. Days grew around it, a week, then 3. He forgot, the way you forget a dream on purpose because remembering would move furniture you can't move back. He was kinder at lights. He was less hurried when something wanted him to be. Until the day the letter came. It had a stamp. He had not seen one in a long time. The postmark was clean. The envelope had his name spelled right, and his apartment number and the city and the zip. It felt like a courtesy more than a habit. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, centered, were 3 words: Meridian Service Adjustment. The words did not look official so much as inevitable. Beneath them, the letter informed him that due to infrastructure upgrades, Meridian line service would be altered on specific nights for the next 8 weeks. At the bottom, in a hand that was not handwritten and yet could not be reproduced by a machine, a sentence had been added. Thank you for your patience and your patronage. Fare collected. 1 day. Fare applied. Threshold removed at Ruskin and 3rd, 7:44 a.m. He read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with the ticket as if the 2 were magnets and wanted to sit. He might have continued like that, a quieter version of himself, admiring the city's sudden lack of calamity in small, superstitious ways, had the train not come back for him. It was not the same train. At least that is what he told himself when he heard it first, weeks later at 11:59 p.m., a sound under the city rather than in it, a sound that did not attach itself to a particular line or map or timetable. He stood up from his couch because standing felt like the ritual required to answer a call. He put on his coat because that was what you did when an old wind wanted to see your face. The station was empty in the performative way empty places get, working hard at it, the way an understudy works hard to be unseen. Jace went down the stairs and thought briefly of calling someone, but there was no one to call for a thing like this. He was both embarrassed at the thought and relieved. The platform's clock said 12:01. The sign above the tracks said special service, and then said nothing else. The tunnel breathed. The lights brightened in a ripple, their hum stepping up a half tone as if the music changed keys. The train arrived as if it had been waiting around the corner this whole time and only now remembered to show its face. The doors opened. The car was not empty. Its passengers stared in that way that is not stare and not don't stare. Some looked through. Some looked around. A few slept, their mouths small and innocent like the mouths of children. He stepped on, the same smell, metal and old wool and the breath of tunnels, the same sign, Meridian Line, inbound. Wednesday, 12:03 a.m. His phone dutifully rolled over to Wednesday. He didn't bother to be startled. He walked the length of the car to the door with the green button and pressed. The hinge breathed. He passed through one car, then another, and then the door with the painted letters waited with the patience of a rule. The conductor looked up when Jace entered. He seemed a touch older. It might have been the kind of older that is imagination. The clocks on the wall had arranged themselves into a new argument. The pin on the lapel caught the light and kept it. "You sent me a letter," Jace said. "I did," the conductor said. He didn't embellish. His hand hovered over a dial and did not turn it. Jace sat, uninvited, and discovered this was acceptable. "What is the train's real purpose?" he asked finally, because the question had been a pebble in his shoe for weeks, and he had let it bruise him for courtesy. The conductor watched his face in the reflection in the window instead of looking at him directly. Diversion, he said, as if hoping the word would suffice a second time. When Jace didn't blink, he sighed soft as a leak in a tire. He laid his palms on the desk, fingers spread. They were strong hands with map lines. The one-line story is that we take those who are about to stress a fragile hour and displace them by a day. We relieve pressure. The fabric holds. And the two-line story? Jace asked. The conductor's mouth tilted. The two-line story is that we collect surplus. Jace felt the truth land not on his mind but on the back of his neck, a winter bird that did not ask permission. Surplus, he repeated. The word felt wrong in his mouth, like a pebble you accidentally bit down on. Untaken choices, the conductor said. His voice was very quiet now, as if he were performing a second job in secret. Every city bristles with them. The extra step you almost took into the street. The apology you almost said. The call you almost made. They flicker, and most extinguish themselves harmlessly. A few cast shadows longer than they have any right to. The train harvests those. It keeps them from rotting in the pipes. Jace tried to picture that. Choices like leaves clogging gutters, choices swollen with rain, choices sucked into grates and choked there. It was a metaphor that refused to be a metaphor. It wanted to be literal. And you decide which ones count. I tend them, the conductor said, and a faint color rose in his face, as if the verb embarrassed him. I'm a caretaker. There's a ledger. There are also bells that ring when you can't stand to look at the ledger anymore, and you go by the bell. Tonight you heard one. Then why am I here? Jace asked, before the conductor could pretend again that everything was simple. If I'm not a knot anymore, if the city's pipe is clear. The conductor rotated a dial a fraction. The tunnel brightened, then dimmed, like something deep out there had opened an eye and closed it again. Because someone else is, he said, and because you are going to be asked to collect fare. Jace felt his hand close in on itself, like a fist, without deciding to do it. No, he said. It's not a sentence, the conductor said. It's a turn. Tomorrow, your tomorrow, you will be on a platform with somebody who is not strong enough to say yes or no to their own hour. You will see their hand shake when they look at the tracks. You will say one word. You will say it because you know what a day costs and what it buys. You will say it as a collector or as a passenger. The train does not care. It cares only that the hour survives its own teeth. There are some moments in a life when you feel a click inside you, like a gear catching happily. This wasn't one of those. This was the softer sound a drawer makes when you close it with your fingers still inside. Jace thought of bell foundries and of teenagers tapping 7 times, and of a woman smoothing grocery bags like lullabies. He thought of a cyclist's chain and a dog in socks, and a man in a sedan laughing because his son had sensed something small and perfect. What word? Jace asked. The conductor smiled, no tiredness in it now, only a sadness that was too soft to bruise. Wait, he said. You'll say wait. The car rolled and hummed. The clocks agreed for 1 second and looked briefly proud of themselves. The conductor turned his head and studied Jace not directly, but through the window's reflection again. You should know, he added, as an afterthought so heavy it bent the floor. I did not start on this side of the desk. Jace looked at the punch on the chain next to the conductor's hand. He imagined the weight of it. He remembered how cold it had been. You refused, he said. I refused, the conductor said. He rubbed his thumb across the etched horizon on the punch handle as if he were polishing an old thought. I used my one day. I stopped at the light. The cyclist lived. The ledger found its balance from a different account. He looked at Jace now directly, eyes the color of unmarked paper. But the bill does not vanish. It arrives when it chooses. I paid. This is how. The train eased into a slower section. The rails sang lower, confession turning toward him. Jace understood something then that had been invisible because of its ordinariness. The conductor's voice was the human thread in the announcements. It wasn't just recorded scripts. It was a man reminding the city that it has a throat and can make sound. "What happens if I don't show?" Jace asked. "Tomorrow, I mean." On the platform, the conductor's mouth made an almost laugh. "You will. Because you heard the bell. And because when a thing has taught you its cost, you respect the price even if you don't like the shop." The train rolled on. Stations came, stations went. Passengers counted stitches in the air with their eyes. In the car 2 compartments back, a child laughed his disembodied laugh again. 7 beats tapped on a knee. Somewhere behind, a woman in a pale coat moved her ticket from her sleeve to her pocket, for reasons unknown to her and not to the ledger. Jace got off at his station, which the sign named as Thursday, because somewhere the decision had been made that the labels needed to slide ahead another square to keep balance. His lungs felt filigreed. He put his hands in his pockets and found the ticket, even though he hadn't taken one this time, folded to a smaller square and softened by human heat. He did not unfold it. He carried it like a stone you pick up and then decide to keep because you might need the shape later. Morning came, and he was where he needed to be. He was on the platform before work. The sky the exact color of old blue chalk, and the breath of the city visible in a slow exhale, where it rose off the river and around the buildings like a scarf. He did not know which person it would be. That didn't matter. Bells do not identify. They only ring. He saw him after 5 minutes, a boy in a sweatshirt with its sleeves chewed almost to lace, standing too near the yellow line. He had the look frustration makes when it puts on sadness as a disguise. His shoes were wrecked in the way shoes get when you decide you don't deserve the better ones. The train had not yet appeared, but the wind that precedes it had, and the boy leaned into it as if it were already here to save him from himself or help him. Jace moved without thinking he was moving. He reached the boy and stood beside him, not in front of him, 1 step away, angled, so that the body language said, "I exist and I see you, not I am stopping you." The boy's mouth opened, the beginning of an argument that had been waiting for any adversary and would have latched onto a wall if it had to. And Jace said the word. Wait, it was a small word. It was a hand placed gently on a jar lid you're not strong enough to open at first. Then R, because someone steadied it. The boy's mouth closed. He looked at Jace as if trying to recognize him from a different kind of life. He swallowed. He stepped back from the line. The train arrived. All wind and light and announcement. And it was a train, and not a god. The boy stepped on because the story had found a different verb to conjugate. As Jace boarded after him, a teenager brushed past. Headphones clamped, thumb tapping a 7 beats. A paper ticket touched Jace's palm and was gone. He did not look. He did not need to. In the car, the place where he liked to sit was open. He sat. Across from him, a suited man held a folded newspaper that might have contained all the words in the world in the wrong order. At the far end, a woman smoothed the plastic ears of grocery bags until they lay flat. Above the door, the digital sign, patient, arrogant, scrolled Meridian Line, inbound, Friday 12:06 a.m. He closed his eyes because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your own mind is to give it less. Behind his eyelids, he could see the clocks on the conductor's wall bickering. He could see the punch on the chain. He could see, too, something else, the pin on the lapel, the little horizon circle, and the way it glowed when the light caught it like a promise or a warning, or both. He opened his eyes when the car shifted a fraction and the metal made that little complaining noise true machines make. Across from him, the suited man folded his paper with care and placed it on the seat beside him as if good behavior might teach it meaning. He looked at Jace, and his eyes were not glass gray today. They had absurdly the color of bell metal, warmed by human touch. Schedules are fictions, the man said, like a ritual or a joke between conspirators. We agree, Jace answered, because he understood that now. And we remember. The suited man's mouth tilted. It could have been approval. It could have been that the ledger had balanced a small line item and allowed itself a smile. At the next station, a figure moved through the cars with practiced grace. He wore a coat cut from a cloth that had decided to be a uniform, only when you looked at it a certain way. A pin on his lapel caught the fluorescent light and caged it. He held out a small punch on a chain, the die plate glinting with a tiny horizon. His eyes were unremarkable except that they were clear. They belonged to a person who had learned the price of a day and had decided anyway to sell and buy. He paused at Jace's row. Their eyes met. The car hummed with tunnel song. Between one moment and the next, somewhere far forward, bells rang. Not loud, not melodramatic. The kind of bells you notice only if you have trained your ear to hear the shape of an hour when it changes its mind. The conductor moved on. The train breathed. The city above them turned itself a little to greet a day it had already met once and was ready to meet again. In the drawer at home, in the dim shallow where takeout menus go to die, Jace's first ticket lay against the letter like a pressed leaf that refuses to lose its color. Later, maybe, he would open the drawer and take it in his hand and make himself remember the exact texture of its paper and the way ink looks when it is not quite dry. He did not need to look now. He carried the feeling of it with him, the weight of a day, stamped and punched, a currency you cannot counterfeit, because it spends itself whether you want it to or not. The train swam through the dark like a thought deciding to be a memory. The tracks sang. The clock above the door trembled and then settled as if it had chosen a side. The sign scrolled its verdict. Next stop, Meridian. The city would have emergencies, and the city would not. People would step halfway into a crosswalk and then back. A cyclist would check his chain and find it seated. A boy would chew the cuff of his sweatshirt and then buy a ticket with coins he found behind a couch to go anywhere that was not the place inside his head. And somewhere, in a car with a door painted by a human hand, a man would spread his palms over a desk and keep the hour from tearing itself. When Jay stood to leave at his stop, he did it with the unassuming dignity of someone doing a job he had not applied for and could not quit. He had learned in the space between Monday and Tuesday and whatever came after that there are positions in a city you don't interview for. They find you. They ask for your day. You give it. He stepped out into the night that was already tomorrow. The platform tiles were clean, and the trash bin sat at its angle like a dog waiting for a command. The stairs up were the same number as ever. He counted them because counting is a way of declaring that numbers still answer to you. Above ground, the tower's red light blinked in the same patient pattern. The wind braided itself through the alleys like an old woman's fingers. Somewhere a bell sounded, the real kind, metal on metal, struck by a hand you could shake if you knew where to go to find it. He turned toward home. Behind him, the train sighed and closed its doors and became a sound that moved away. Then a thought that moved away. Then a kind of peace. In the conductor's room, 6 clocks argued and then pretended they didn't. A finger touched a dial the width of a wrist bone and turned it a hair. On a desk, a ledger lay open to a page where 2 entries faced each other like litigants who had decided to settle out of court. At the top of that page, written in a neat hand that was and wasn't handwriting, was the title of the story the city was telling itself about this hour. It said, "The train that arrived tomorrow," under it, in smaller letters that only those who needed to read them would see. Purpose, not to be on time. Purpose, to keep time whole. When Jace reached his door and fit his key, when the lock turned and the hinge made its tiny sound like a cat swallowing a syllable, when the apartment let him in and he let himself be let in, he did not hear the bells again. He did not need to. He would know where to stand and when to say it. He would know what people look like when a second is heavy. He would know that a day is not a rectangle on a screen but a coin. Spend it like it is real. He would forget when forgetting was kind. He would remember when remembering kept someone upright on a platform with the wind moving the wrong direction. He would walk the city and admit that it ran on secrets as much as wires. And once, on a night months later, when the pin on a lapel threw back a squeak of light like a ship signaling a ship, he would take a punch in his hand and feel how cold it was. And he would understand that some jobs are not assigned. They are inherited from yourself. Out on the meridian, the train threaded the dark seam between one day and the next, a silver needle that never ran out of thread. It did not care whether you thanked it. It cared that when it arrived tomorrow, there would be a city there to meet it, and a handful of passengers who understood that a minute can be both a mercy and a debt. The wind off the river lifted and set down again. Somewhere, a child laughed 7 times, and then, satisfied, slept. Somewhere else, a paper that had refused to be read burned quietly in a bin and warmed a pair of hands. Jace turned out the light. In the moment before dark found all the corners, he saw his reflection in the window and watched it hesitate, just a fraction, and catch up. He lifted his hand. The reflection did too. The lag was almost nothing now. Almost.